I guess this session and those which presentations would follow are a slight change of pace from that we heard this morning. But as John's emphasised, it's about how we do this work and how we get it done more effectively and efficiently and using our resources as best we can. In Australia, we have the 2008 National Security Statement, which identified organised crime as a non-traditional threat to Australian security. And I should say, right at the outset of this presentation, this is a joint presentation with my colleague from the AIC, Dr. Katie Willis, who actually is in Belgium at the moment with the European Union committee looking at performance measurement issues to do with drugs and crime in that community itself. So Katie couldn't be here, so I'm stepping in to do the presentation. Anyway, returning to the National Security Statement, the statement also highlighted the overlap between border security, transnational crime and organised crime. This coincided with an increase in the public profile of certain serious organised crime organisations, particularly outlaw motorcycle gangs, as reported in the media. As a Sydney resident, I was actually quite disturbed by the incident that occurred at Sydney Airport a couple of years ago, which really is the sort of thing one doesn't expect to see in a community like Australia, certainly in a place like the airport, where the death of one of the motorcycle bikie gangs members. So it is in our present environment, in our face, in our life. So we have to work with it. Now, as we've already heard, Australia is committed to a national response to organised crime. And as we've also heard, the influence of organised crime, well demonstrated by Andy's presentation just before morning tea, cannot be underestimated. For example, the United Nations Development Programme has suggested that the impact of organised crime can be so pervasive and extensive that in some countries it is important to treat it as a key player or influencer in any analysis of governance models which describe how those countries operate. So while it might be an illegal, illicit player, it has to be factored into assessment of how we can build governance models, because it is there, it will not go away in the foreseeable future. So if we're going to work with these countries, then they have to be part of the equation. A phenomenon as complex as organised crime presents major challenges to law enforcement on many levels. Effective responses often require quite innovative initiatives undertaken using novel and complex organisational and management arrangements. As such, it is essential that appropriate methods are also in place for measuring the impact and effectiveness of these measures. This is a point that I heard very strongly in the opening presentation by Bill Hughes yesterday, and I was really pleased to hear it emphasised as much as he did. So our presentation today aims to offer some insight into how this can be done. Using recent experience developed specifically for measuring the effectiveness of current drug law enforcement practices in Australia, my colleague Katie Willis and I hope to offer some insight into what forms the approaches to measuring the impact of law enforcement on serious organised crime might take and how they can be best employed. To do this, we'll spend some time thinking about definitions of organised crime, identifying the costs, understanding the harms, and considering methods for assessing the impact of law enforcement efforts directed at serious organised crime, with a specific focus on the use of performance measurement as a framework for assessing ongoing impacts and effectiveness. I'll explain why we are suggesting concentrating on the development and use of performance measurement framework as a key tool in a moment. But first, let me just recap some of the key issues that need to be considered when you start trying to develop a method for measuring effectiveness and assessing impacts. And I apologise for actually covering some of what other speakers have spoken about over the last couple of days, but you'll see as I go along that we're actually going to be using that information in a slightly different way to build this framework or this proposed framework that we're outlining here today. Now, the term organised crime is used extensively across law enforcement, academia, the media and elsewhere, and captures a broad range of illicit activity. However, a precise understanding of organised crime is not easy to develop, since definitions of organised crime and the types of organised crime that occurs within and between countries differ, as we've heard. Furthermore, organised crime encompasses not only illegal activities within the black economy, but illegal activities within the legitimate economy, as we've also heard. Disentangling and understanding these relationships present law enforcement and regulatory agencies with a multitude of operational and strategic challenges. So not surprisingly, there is an ongoing debate in academic circles about how to define and classify serious organised crime, its activities, members and organising structures. Reaching consensus on a definition of serious organised crime is important because models that law enforcement use directly affect how information is collected, the networks and the actors targeted, and the investigative tactics used. Consistency in definition also permits a greater degree of rigour for interjurisdictional comparison, although it is essential to understand that there will be variation from different settings from one to the other, and we'll talk about how we can address that component of this as well. In Australia, serious and organised crime is defined at the Commonwealth level in the Australian Crime Commission Act 2002. As an offence that involves two or more offenders and substantial planning and organisation involves or is of a kind that ordinarily involves the use of sophisticated methods and so forth. There's a range of components of this definition. I don't propose to go through it in great detail, as you can look at it yourself. Now, the list of offence types outlined in the Act is substantial. However, the Australian Crime Commission, highlights 7 potential areas of specific concern to this country. These are drugs, environmental threats, money laundering, intellectual property crime, fraud, firearms and technology-based attacks. Now, this is quite a broad list of legitimate concern, but what is the magnitude of harms associated with serious organised crime? We've heard about harms and how they have to be understood in context as well. So this is an important issue to bear in mind as we talk about this issue. Now, certainly serious organised crime places a significant cost burden on the Australian economy and community each year. This is in terms of lost revenue and direct and indirect costs to the criminal justice system, as well as the social, health and welfare systems more broadly. As we've also heard, the exact total cost of serious organised crime in Australia remains unknown, although estimates currently suggest that the figure is at somewhere between $10 and $15 billion annually, which translates in fact to about 1 to 1.5% of Australia's GDP. Given the considerable financial and social burden that serious organised crime places on the Australian community, it is important that law enforcement develops ways of demonstrating its effectiveness in addressing this type of crime. In doing so, this not only serves as a useful internal and external accountability mechanism, but provides law enforcement with empirical evidence through which to inform future operational, strategic and policy directions. This is a point that I think I'd like you to all ponder as we go along. Performance measurement and evaluation tends to be backwards looking, but in fact the tool itself is a key planning tool for where we go to from here, and we need to have these systems in place to be able to make these decisions in an informed and sensible way, or a more informed and sensible way. But understanding the harms from serious organised crime is a more subtle process than just counting the dollars. The costs of serious organised crime translate into a range of different harms that vary by type and scale. Work from a number of countries, principally UK and Canada, have developed harm typologies in an attempt to categorise and prioritise these harms. This has been done to better understand the range and potential impact of these harms on the community, and also to assist in determining appropriate operational responses. Now, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police has identified 5 harms from serious organised crime. These include environmental harms, harms to health and safety, both personal harms, economic and financial harms to government, and financial harms, both personal and business. The Criminal Intelligence Service in Canada has also adopted a harm framework to assist in the analysis of threats posed by serious organised crime. Their typology includes social harm, economic harm, political harm and indirect harm dimensions. Now, both the RCMP and the CISC assess the harm using a structured approach, principally the harm prioritisation scale, which is combined with a specialised threat measurement technique, to produce a prioritised list identifying the most harmful criminal activity to the least harmful criminal activity in a given community. This then assists these agencies to make informed and objective resourcing decisions, to maximise targeting of this criminal activity. The harm typology developed by the UK's Serious Organised Crime Agency includes a similar range of categories to those of the used in Canada, but also further defines the harms in terms of whether each harm reflects impacts on the level of individual, local, community or regional, or domestic or international levels. In Australia, the Commonwealth Organised Crime Strategic Framework identifies the key threats posed by organised crime and coordinates a whole-of-government response to address them. A key element of the framework includes an organised crime threat assessment, and this sits alongside an organised crime response plan and implementation of multi-agency responses. Now, using the work from the Home Office, we suggest that the harm typologies outlined in the previous slides can be distilled into three broad types of harms: harms to individuals, business and society. Addressing these harms can be interpreted as high-level goals, and I'm going to use this term a few times, so it's one of the words to remember. There will be a test at the end. Will be interpreted as high-level goals of organised crime law enforcement. That is to minimise harm from serious organised crime activity to individuals, business and the general community. Now, individual-level harms may include, for example, losses to individuals from organised fraud, victimisation by drug-related crimes, including gun crime, harm caused by drug abuse, and the exploitation of trafficked persons. Business-level harms can include losses to businesses through fraud and the cost of preventing it, victimisation by drug-related thefts, the loss of revenue to legitimate businesses from counterfeiting or privacy issues. Societal level harms may include the impact of fear and distrust caused by organised crime, losses to taxpayers from smuggling and fraud, and the cost of dealing with organised crime and its effects. Defining high-level goals in this way does not simply provide a conceptual platform from which to view the enforcement of serious organised crime. Rather, it provides law enforcement with a means for constructing an outcomes-focused performance measurement framework to assess their aggregate contribution to reducing serious organised crime.